Hi everyone, welcome to this short session. Tim Baker's my name. I just wanted to take you through some of the key shifts that are part of the HR landscape at the moment. As we come out of COVID, of course, there are a whole lot of changes in the world of work, as we know, and I wanted to run through some of those with you today, and in particular make reference to my new book, The Future of Human Resources, Unlocking Human Potential. So welcome wherever you are. You'll get a copy of the slides and the recording at the end of this presentation. And I'm really just going to give you an overview of what these 13 shifts are as I see them. So I'll give you a little bit of a heads up of that. I'll just share my screen to start with. Okay, so for some of you who may not know who I am, I'll just give you a little bit of an overview. You can see that I write books. In fact, I've written 16 books, one of which, of course, is The Future of Human Resources, Unlocking Human Potential. You can see I'm also a keynote speaker. I run workshops in leadership and organisational change. And you can see I play rugby in the Golden Oldies competition here in Brisbane. And we only play every second week because it takes 2 weeks to recover at my age. So folks, let's get stuck into the process, and let me just start off by perhaps putting on the table an elephant in the room. People might be saying or thinking to themselves, well, here we go again, more crystal ball gazing. Now, I would say that the shifts that I'm talking about are in play anyway. And all I'm trying to do is to give you an opportunity to look at your organisation and perhaps assess it in terms of where you fit in with these 13 changes. So let's talk about those changes and let's spend a bit of time going through those. The first thing I wanted to do is to address the question as to how we might address these 13 shifts. And I think the most convenient way to address them is to look at the employee life cycle. And that is, what I mean by that is that when employees enter into a workplace, they're normally recruited, they're selected, they're inducted, they're trained, they're developed, they get opportunities for promotion, and ultimately what happens is they leave the organisation. And this is a very familiar pathway for all of us in terms of being employees. So what I thought I would do is to look at the interventions that occur along the way of an employee in the world of work, and then look at the 13 shifts as they apply to that. And I've got a special offer for you at the end of this presentation. So let's have a look at this employee life cycle model a little closer. So all employees pass through these different phases in their employment, and I would suggest to you that that's not going to change anytime soon. I mean, when a new person comes into an organisation, we have to recruit and select them. So there is a process involved in that. And once the employee starts, now whether they might be a person who is in the organisation or outside the organisation, they still have to go through a recruitment and selection process in most cases. And once they've gone through that and they're successful, the successful candidate will then be inducted and on board and go through an onboarding process in the organisation. And I think once that's occurred, they're exposed to a whole range of learning and development initiatives that the organisation can offer, which will help that person become more effective in the job they're employed to do, and also in terms of their own personal development as well. And then, of course, employees are rewarded and given an opportunity for promotion. And so people might want to go up the sort of corporate ladder in a larger organisation, and certainly they're rewarded based on their promotions. And ultimately, an employee may leave or exit. And normally what happens when they depart is that they're given an exit interview by human resources, and away they go to their next employment opportunity or their self-employment opportunity. So this is a very well-established pathway. It's not one that's likely to change. And so what I've done is I've actually looked at the 13 shifts in relation to each of these steps in the process. And just want to challenge some of your thinking around that and what we might do to accelerate and improve the quality of services that HR offers. So let's have a look at the 13 different shifts. This is a table in my book that's critical to the discussion we're having at the moment, because you can see that over on the right, on the left-hand side, we've got the different phases of the employee life cycle. So, for example, there's the starting phase, there's the developing phase, the rewarding phase, and of course the parting phase. So those things, of course, are well established. And you can see that there are 13 shifts in the current and future mindset shifts. So these 13 shifts are really related to each of those phases. There are a couple that perhaps don't directly relate to that, but the majority of them do. And you'll notice that the second column looks at the current mindset. That is the traditional mindset that's been pretty much around for many, many years. And then on the right-hand side is the future mindset. So this is the mindset shifts that are required in the future, if not, well, now. But I think many people are in transition between the current and future states. And so what I'm going to do is just address each of these briefly, these shifts, and just talk about why they're important, what's actually happening in that regard. And while I'm going through that, you might like to consider your own organisation and consider, well, where are we? Where are we in relation to these shifts? Are we over on the left-hand side? And do we need to move to the right-hand side? Are we in transit between the current and future states, or are we well embedded in the future states? And I suspect that when you go through this, you'll probably see different aspects of these shifts in different places. So the very first shift that's required is when we're recruiting somebody or perhaps selecting somebody for a vacant role in an organisation, the conventional wisdom around this was to use past behaviour to predict future performance. And that's stood us in pretty good stead, and we call this behavioural interviewing. So what we actually do there in a traditional sense is we ask the candidate to give us examples where they have done certain things in the past, and that gives us a sense of whether or not they might be able to apply what they have demonstrated in their future role. Now, that's fine to an extent, but the world we live in now is so incredibly we're living in a world of enormous upheaval and warp speed. So the argument is, if we're actually assessing people on past behaviour, that's not necessarily going to be accurate, because we don't quite know what the future is going to look like. And I suspect that the big shift, and it's starting to occur now, I find, is that we need to assess people, that is, select people on the basis of future potential rather than past behaviour. Now, to some degree, of course, you want to know that people have done the job in the past and they're capable of doing the job in the future. But ultimately, I think a far better approach and a better shift is to actually look at people's future potential. You might say, well, where do we start there? Well, I think the literature suggests that when we're looking at future potential, what we're looking for are people who are able to be curious and adaptable. There are two traits that we want people to have in the future, whether they be in technical roles or managerial roles. We're looking for curiosity and adaptability. So they're two attributes that are critically important. So instead of shaping questions around past performance, we should also be shaping questions around future potential. And I think what the tweak should be there when we're selecting people is that we make sure that we ask questions around future potential. Now, there are a number of diagnostics that are starting to develop now out there in the world of work, where we can apply certain diagnostics to measure future potential. And I would encourage you to investigate those further, because your organisation as it is right now will not be the same in 2 years or even indeed in 12 months' time. And so if we don't start to select on future potential, we're actually not doing a real service in our selection process. Now, once that candidate has been successful and they've signed the contract, then of course they're exposed to an onboarding process, which is phase 2 or shift 2. And the trouble with the induction and onboarding system that we have in the world of work right now is that it's very organizational centric. In other words, it's all about conditioning the new recruit or new hire to fit in with the organization. Now, again, there needs to be some degree of that, but I think we're missing out on a huge opportunity. And I believe we should move from an onboarding to an integration process. What I mean by integration is that we need to look at what people can offer the organization. So when people come on board, they have certain strengths and innate talents that may not have been unearthed in the selection process. For example, they might have excellent knowledge of the industry. They might be really good networkers. So what we need to do is to be able to be aware of this in the early stages of their employment, so we can job craft to some degree. We can give people an opportunity to be able to use those innate talents and potentialities in their current role. But unfortunately, the process we have at the moment is so centered around fitting, square pegs in square holes if possible. But what we need to do is to spend more time finding out what the employee's natural attributes are so that we can use them in their new role. Now, how do we do that? Well, we need to enter into conversations and dialogue early with the new employee to find out more about who they are, instead of just simply inducting them into the organizational network. And of course, I go into great detail in my book about how we do this. Now, shift 3 is, of course, the idea was for many years pre-COVID that people would come to work, they'd have an office space, or they'd have an open office space, whatever it might be, and of course they'd be sitting there physically in the office. Now, we all know now, because of COVID, that we're moving into a hybrid working model. Whether we like it or not, hybrid working is here to stay as a concept, and we need to get our heads around that. It doesn't necessarily mean that people work from home all the time. Hybrid working implies that at certain times people are expected in the office, and other times they can quite easily work remotely. So we need to gear all our systems and processes towards hybrid working models. Granted, a lot of frontline workers, of course, have to be on the job. They have to be there. But a vast majority of employees are going to be exposed more and more to the hybrid working conditions that we're now getting used to. And I note that HR often asks the question now, how do we get our employees to come back to work? But I think a far better question might be, why don't they want to come back to work? And we need to think carefully about that. So the shift number 3 is from on-site to hybrid working. So all our IT systems, all our learning and development systems, our induction processes, all of those things have to be geared towards hybrid working. Now, shift number 4 is them and us, as opposed to collaboration. For over 200 years since the Industrial Revolution, we have been involved in a very traditional management model that says management does the thinking, employees do the work. Now, many organizations believe that they've gone past that, but I think when you scratch the surface, that's not necessarily the case. There's still very much a them and us mindset in lots of organizations. And we need to move to a truly collaborative role where shared leadership is part and parcel of what we do day to day. And so we need to make this shift, particularly early on in an employee's life, so that they understand that they're accountable for a whole lot of decisions and not just simply mindlessly come to work and take direction from their manager. And I think a lot of managers need to understand that their role is to create a collaborative working environment, not one of them and us. So that's obviously an important shift for the future and now as well. So those shifts are very much focused on the starting phase. Now, in the developing phase, which is, of course, giving people opportunities to grow and develop in their role, the first shift to look at is a shift from training to multi-dimensional learning. Now, what I mean by that is that 80% of the work of the training that we do in organisations is to actually help people do better in their current job. Now, it's obviously the most popular form of training, and one of the reasons for that is, of course, you can get a quick return on investment and you can actually see tangible evidence of whether people can do their job more effectively. For example, if you give people sales training who are in sales roles, you can determine whether or not they've sold more product. However, there are 3 other dimensions of learning and development that I think are critically important. There is personal development, which is developing the person so that indirectly they'll become better employees. There's problem-based learning, which is about learning how to solve thorny problems. And there's machine learning, which, of course, we're becoming more and more integrated with AI and digital technology. So we need to actually make sure that we create in human resources a multi-dimensional learning opportunities and not focus almost exclusively on job-centered learning. So we've got job-centered learning, we've got person-centered learning, we've got problem-based learning, and we've got machine-based learning. And that's what I mean by So in other words, 25% of the budget should be allocated to each of those dimensions roughly. Now, another shift is moving from the job to the non-job roles. For long periods of time, we've used job descriptions, which we all get frustrated about, because the job description doesn't really capture what people do at work. It captures the technical aspect of what people do at work, but it doesn't capture the non-job roles that people play. And essentially, in the book, I've identified 4 non-job roles that are critically important to people's success, which isn't necessarily documented in the job description. These roles include having a positive attitude and enthusiasm. Now, we don't want people necessarily bouncing off the walls with excitement when they come to work, but we certainly don't want them whinging, whining, complaining, and so forth. That's an important non-job role, without a doubt, but we don't normally talk about that in our job description. We want people to have a team role. In other words, we want people to be team players. And again, it's not something that's normally identified in the traditional job description. We want people to have a skill development role. In other words, they continually grow and develop both personally and professionally. And fourthly, we want people to have an innovation and continuous improvement role. That is, to bring their ideas, their thoughts, their suggestions to work with them. And so what I'm really alluding to in Shift 6 is how do we transition from a job description to a role description? And it's not semantics, it's actually a major shift. In Shift 7, is exactly that, which is about that job description to role description. And lots of people have difficulty with this, but it simply means that we need to acknowledge that the non-job roles that people have are just as critical to their success as their job role. So essentially, people are conducting a number of roles at work. Now, Shift 8 is job design to job redesign. The job design we use and have used for the last 100 years is what we call job specification. Now, job specification is where you put people into small bite-sized pieces and give people a number of key performance areas to work on. And everyone in the organisation is like a huge jigsaw where we have little parts that all come together to create a product or a service at the end. But we need to think differently about this, because The great weakness about our current job design is that although everyone has got a very clear idea about what they're supposed to do, which is, of course, its strength, the problem is they have blinkers on and they can't understand, nor do they appreciate other aspects of the organisation. And when that happens, there's a lot of finger pointing and ignorance. And of course, the customer at the end doesn't care about all those divisions. They just simply want their product or their service. So we need to move towards a concept called job crafting, where people are actually deliberately changing and morphing their job to suit their strengths and innate talents. Now, shift 9 is moving from competition to partnership. And what am I talking about there? I'm specifically talking about not seeing artificial intelligence as competition for jobs, which is the normal paradigm. You know, that if artificial intelligence is introduced into this company, what it's going to do is it's going to take people's jobs. Well, we need to think differently about this. We need to see ourselves in a partnership with AI. And I think, you know, we're starting to make progress in that area. It's impossible to stem the tide of AI. This is going to continue. And what we need to do is to learn to work with it rather than to compete with it. And so the new concept we have now is what we might call super teams. These are teams of people who work in collaboration with AI to produce extraordinary results. But this is done in a partnership model rather than a competition model. So that's another big shift we need to make in the world of work. And HR has a really important role to play in that regard. So shifts 5 to 9 are very much related to the development of the individual in the world of work. And then, of course, we move into the rewarding phase. The rewarding phase, we tend, unfortunately, to promote people on the basis of their technical know-how still. And, you know, so we put, you know, the manager of engineering will often put the best engineer in that position, even though it requires a different skill set. So we really need to make that paradigm shift from technical know-how to people leadership. So we should be looking for attributes of leadership for people who happen to be in leaders' roles, whether it's a leading hand or a CEO. And that shift has not been fully embraced, as I'm sure you'd be aware. And shift number 11, we need to get away from this idea that performance reviews are really important. I don't think performance reviews are very effective at all. I don't see any evidence of that. In fact, I see no research that shows that performance reviews actually increase performance. So the question is, why do we do them? How about we have a regular ongoing developing performance conversations throughout the year? And if we do that, we're creating an environment where people are developing on an ongoing basis. And shift 12 is, instead of moving from extrinsic motivation, which is the carrot and the stick, we need to move towards cultivating human spirit and work. So we all know engagement levels are very low throughout the world. And I think part of that is that we are heavily relying on extrinsic motivation rather than intrinsic motivation, or what I call human spirit and work. And finally, when somebody leaves an organization, usually the last thing they do is they have an exit interview with HR. And then we sort of, you know, wave them goodbye and off they go. But I think we've got to start moving towards building networks. And I think that's starting to happen so that we stay in touch with our previous employees, because there are opportunities that are undoubtedly open in the future where we might bring people back for, you know, small contractual opportunities. And we've got a pool of resources that we can call upon if and when they're needed in terms of short-term projects. And I think our paradigm shift there needs to be moving from exit interviews to building networks. So folks, that's the 13 shifts. And obviously I go into this in great detail in my book, The Future of Human Resources, Unlocking Human Potential. And I just wanted to mention that every Friday at 10 o'clock, I have one of these sessions. Only goes for 30 minutes. And next week, I'm going to talk about improving performance by rethinking job design. So I'm going to go into that in a little bit more detail next week. So you're more than welcome, and you can see there the date, and of course down the bottom is the link. So just as you did today, you can click on that link when I send you the slides, and of course you'll be registered and ready to go for next week. Now, I did say there'd be a special offer, and I just want to give you that offer right now. And my book, The Future of Human Resources, Unlocking Human Potential, is available on Amazon for $46 and plus postage. But today, special price, I'll give you the book for $27 plus postage, and I'll sign it for you and send it out to you. All you've got to do is send me an email by the close of business today, and there's my email address. If you do that, I will arrange that for you, and I'll get the book sent out to you immediately, signed, and you'll get that at a significantly reduced price. So, folks, that's it from me. As I say, these sessions are short and sweet. They're all about giving you some heads up. I know you're very busy people, and so am I. And it's a great way for me to just distill down a few messages in a very simple way. So, sign up for the webinar next Friday, and of course send me an email and I'll send out a book for you in the mail basically immediately. So thanks everyone, thanks for the opportunity. I'm looking forward to perhaps seeing you next Friday, and all the best, and have a wonderful weekend. Thank you and goodbye.